Good afternoon. My name is David Ault. I am a professor emeritus here at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, and the director of the Index of Need project for the Illinois Community College Board. Today, I would like to talk about the trends in Illinois population since the 2010 census. We're going to look at the population trends with respect to disaggregation by census category and a cultural category, the Hispanics. Look at the change in the 18 to 24-year-old cohort since 2010, and we will disaggregate the population statistics by Cook County, Chicago, the collar counties, Northeast Quadrant, and the rest of the state. I will then discuss the index of need, just to refresh your memory with respect to the calculation of the index and the sources that we use to collect the data that are used to calculate the index. I then want to move to two topics, one of which is the implications for post-secondary education of these population trends since 2010. And I also want to talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic, the attempts to control the virus on secondary education. I will then conclude with a few remarks, and we will take questions. This is the patron saint of economists and statisticians. Old character from a comic strip called Little Abner. I can't pronounce his last name. I don't think anyone can. But in any case, this is just to indicate one thing about economists and statisticians. We can find a way to rain on anybody's parade. In April 2017, I made a presentation to this group on a similar topic, that is the changes in demographics since the 2010 census to roughly 2015-16. The conclusions that I had at that point and the comments that I had at that point were that the next data collection would begin in 2019 with the first census reports for 2020 released in mid-2020. Actually, they will be released now on in March of 2021 due to changes in the calendar by the Bureau of the Census due to a number of factors. The data that are released in March of 2021 will be as of April 1st, 2020, but the official estimate of populations is as of July 1st, 2020, and those July 1st estimates are then used to make projections for the next decade. At that point, I said the following: if the current trends that I observed in early 2017 continued, Illinois would fall from number 5 in population to number 6. The median age would rise about 2 years. The number of people and the percentages of the population in the 18 to 24-year-old cohort would fall to 9.2 to 9.5% from roughly a little over 10% in 2010. With respect to the ethnic makeup of the population, there would be a shift of roughly 1 to 2% of the white population to non-white populations. Domestic out-migration would exceed international migration to the state, and it could exceed birth minus deaths, that is the natural increase in the population as well. If that occurred, the population of the state would fall. Further, I would expect, because of the aging of the population, that the percentage of population in the workforce would decline, and it might decline absolutely. That is, that there would be fewer persons in the workforce by the end of the decade than there were at the beginning of the decade. For definitions for what we are going to do, we're going to compare Illinois to the nation. We will look at Cook County with Chicago City as a percentage of Cook County. We will look at the collar counties, the X's that you see in the slide, and the collar counties are DuPage, Kane, Kendall, Lake, McHenry, and Will. And we will look at the northeast quadrant, which consists of Cook, plus the collar counties, plus Boone, DeKalb, Grundy, Kendall, LaSalle, and Winnebago. This is an area bounded basically by I-39 north-south and I-80 east-west. Some people include Lee and Ogle County in the Northeast quadrant. I do not do so for most of my work. So what does Illinois look like in 2020? We are now number 6 behind California, Texas, Florida, New York, and Pennsylvania. We have this distinction of being the number 1 state with respect to total population loss over the past year. In fact, the total population in Illinois today, or as of July 1st, 2019, is smaller than it was on July 1, 2010. We had about 12.8 million people in 2010. We now are estimated to have 12.67 million. The peak Illinois population during the past decade is 12.9 million, and that was in 2013. Illinois has had the largest population loss in the US. It has lost population for the last 6 years. From July 1, 2018 to July 1, 2019, 94 of the 102 counties in Illinois lost population. Over the decade, only 6 counties gained population. Kane, Kendall, Grundy, and Will in the collar counties, Champaign County due to the growth of the University of Illinois, and Monroe County in southwest Illinois as people moved out of St. Clair County around the St. Louis area to Monroe County to live and then work in St. Louis. With respect to the ethnic distribution of the population and its Hispanic population, as of July 1, 2019, 70.8% of the population was white. Blacks accounted for 14.6%, Native Americans 0.6%, Asian Americans 5.9%. Other that is not classified is either white, black, Native American, Asian, or 2+, accounted for 5.9%. And this is basically the population that has immigrated or is associated with Central and South America. 2+ was a category that was added in 2010. It was designed for people who have heritage, especially parentage, in more than one of the 7 ethnic categories. If you, for example, had Asian parents and Native American parents, you were expected to check 2+ and indicate that. We have had real problems with the consistency of individuals using that particular category. And Hispanics, which is basically a cultural category, it is not an ethnic category, accounted for 17.5% of the population. Hispanics, when they check that category, are asked to check off one of the other 7 ethnic categories to indicate the nature of their ethnicity. This is the United States versus Illinois from July 1, 2010 to July 1, 2019. As you can see, Illinois looks very much like the United States as a whole. A loss of a white population as a percentage of 1 to 2%. Black population has gone up about 1%. Native Americans, this is a difficult category because of the consistency in filling out this category by those who can claim Native American ethnicity. Asians have remained just about constant. There never have been a lot of Pacific Islanders in the state. The 2 categories that you look at now are other, which has grown about 2% as a percentage of total population in both the United States and Illinois, and this tendency to not use 2+ as an ethnic category. So the 2+ category has fallen, in Illinois has fallen by about 50% of the percentage. In actual percentage points, it's about 2. And as you can see, with respect to Hispanics or Latinas, Latinx's, the percentage of both the US population and Illinois population has actually declined over this decade, mainly as Mexicans or individuals who had immigrated from Mexico leave the state, either return to Mexico or go to basically the southeast and west. With respect to adults, in 2010, Illinois had a little less than 10.1 million adults age 16 and over. In 2019, we had just a little bit less than 10.2 million adults ages 16 and over. As you can see, again, essentially Illinois and the United States are basically the same when it comes to the ethnic distribution of its population over the age of 16. With respect to the distribution of the population and some movement since 2010, population of Illinois is concentrated in the northeast quadrant. 71.3% of the population live there. Over the decade, it has lost 0.3% of its population. It would have actually gained 0.5% if we exclude Cook County. With respect to Chicago, population is moving basically from southeast to northwest, and the city has lost 1% of its population over the decade. In the northeast quadrant, we have basically people moving from the northern part of the county to the south and west, particularly Kendall, Will, and to a lesser extent, Grundy County. As you can see, all of the state, that is the loss of population in Illinois, has basically been throughout the state. It is not concentrated in a particular part of the state. The north has lost 5%, west nearly 6%, the east 2.5%. South, that area below Mount Vernon, Illinois, another 5%. Central Illinois, around Peoria, Bloomington, has lost 3.5%. And Metro East, the area around St. Louis, has also lost about 3% of its population over the decade. This I just want you to see the stability of Illinois' population by distribution over the last decade. Cook County accounts for about 42% of the state's population. The city of Chicago accounts for a little over 50% of Cook County's population. As you can see, the populations of the collar counties, DuPage, Kane, Lake, McHenry, and Will have basically remained the same over the last decade. And the northeast quadrant has been stable with respect to 71 or so percent of the population of the state. Age distributions are quite important, of course, to educational planning. The percentage of 18 to 24-year-olds, the traditional college-age populations, as you can see from the left-hand figure, the percentage of 18 to 24-year-olds has declined over the decade. The median age of the population has grown as well. And I can better illustrate it, I think a little better illustrated in the next slide, because these are the percentage changes. And as you can see, the 18 to 24-year-old percentage of the state's population has declined significantly. 6% for the U.S. as a whole, about 5%, 4%, 5% for Illinois, but it is Chicago and Cook County where the decline is quite significant, about 12% decline in the 18 to 24-year-old populations living in Cook and Chicago. With respect to median age, the U.S. is growing older. Its median age has aged about 3%. Over the decade, Illinois has aged a little less than 5. Cook County has aged about 5. The city of Chicago has aged more rapidly, about 6%. So Illinois and the U.S. as a whole, the median age is about 38.4, 38.3. Cook County is now 37, and Chicago is 34.9. And that really is due to the movement out of the city of Chicago and Cook County of families. Another important category for us in higher education are ESL households. We disaggregate that by 4 language groups in the census, those households in which Spanish is spoken. Secondly, and other European language, which is basically the European languages of German, French, and so forth. Asian languages, which include Chinese and Vietnamese, Japanese, and then other languages that are not elsewhere classified. Those tend to be primarily Middle Eastern languages and some languages out of Africa. But as you can see, the percentage of households that speak Spanish has remained relatively constant at about 60%. Other Indo-European languages have lost about 1 percentage point. That has basically been picked up by Asians, which have gained 1 to 2 percentage points, and other, which has also basically doubled with respect to its percentage of the households in Illinois. And as you can see on the far right, the percentage of adults living in these ESL households has increased another 1 to 2% over the decade. Now, let me move to the index of need just to refresh your knowledge of the way in which the index is calculated. There are 4 components in the index: a component related to education, component related to poverty. ESL households is another component, and then we have the unemployed. ESL households are taken from an American Community Survey table, B16004. But what's important about that table is that the households are asked to assess their ability to speak English. And they are given 4 choices. They speak English very well, they speak English well, they speak English not well, or they speak English not at all. We combine the latter 2 categories, not well and not at all, into a category called does not speak English well. And we weight the numbers in that category by 1.5. Then we combine well and very well, weight that by 1.0. With respect to education, those people who have less than 9 grades of formal education, their numbers are weighted by 1.5. If you have 9 grades but less than high school diploma or its equivalent, we weight that by 1.0. The index is calculated as follows. We calculate an index for each county or part of a county in what we call an area planning council or a community college district. They are basically synonymous. The weight for education, that is the sum of those with less than 9, weighted by 1.5, plus 9 less than high school diploma, weighted by 1, is weighted 0.45. Poverty, 0.25. ESL, again, 1.5 times does not speak English well, plus 1.0 speaks English well. To get the number used to calculate the index, we weight that number by 0.25, and then we weight unemployment by 0.05. The one thing that I want to stress is that all county and part of county numbers are relative to the state total for that particular category. So we then sum up the index numbers for each county or part of county in a community college district, and that gives us the index number. We can and suggest that when you look at the index number, you look at it as the probability that a resident in Illinois in need of 1 or more adult education programs lives in that community college district. Okay, so if the index number is 0.5, be half the state's population, we would argue then that half the state's population in need of adult education lives in that particular community college district. Again, let me stress that the index number is a relative number to total state population. Absolute numbers do not determine the index of need number for each community college district. The principal sources that we use for data, population basically comes from the Bureau of the Census, now data.census.gov. We go to something called population estimates and take their estimates for vintage July 1, 2019 data. We also use the American Community Survey, tables B0100X, B0200X, B0300X. Right now, that's 2019 data that has been released. The latest edition of that data will be released in December of this year, and that will be as of July 1, 2019. The X is a number that corresponds to an ethnic category, and the table 0300 gives you the Hispanics. Immigrants, we have an ACS table that we use. That table tells us the number of people who have immigrated to the U.S. from a foreign country and have lived here less than 10 years. Educational attainment is broken out by less than 9, less than 12, and other educational attainment categories in table 15001. We get our base poverty data from the ACS 17001. I've talked to you about ESL data, where that comes from. Labor force data comes from the Illinois Department of Employment Security. It's LAUS tables. TANF and public aid program eligibles, that is numbers that are generated for cases and persons by the Department of Human Resources. They send us data basically for June of each year. We do get mental health and development disability data from the Office of Mental Health and the Office of Development Disability, although those numbers have been more difficult to obtain since the department was reorganized 2 years ago. Corrections data comes from the annual reports by facility from the Department of Corrections. When we need more detailed data on income, earnings, industry of employment, or more detailed employment statistics with respect to unemployment and the labor force, we go to the Bureau of Economic Analysis and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Our maps are generally drawn from the Illinois State Library or from SIUE's Lovejoy Library. I'd now like to take a look at the demographic changes and their implications for community colleges and other post-secondary education institutions in Illinois. It should be obvious that if the number of traditional college-age students, ages 18 to 24, declines, that the base market from which higher education derives its student bodies is going to be affected, and it's going to tend to decline because the estimate in this age group has and will continue to decline due primarily to domestic outmigration, particularly of those people 25 to 44 who take their families with them, and the simple aging of the population, because that population either has the education that it wants or is just simply not interested in trying to go back to school. The US population is growing older. It's growing older for a couple of reasons, not the least of which is the decline in the number of immigrants seeking permanent residency in the United States. It's difficult to predict how many immigrants will seek permanent residency because their desire to live and stay in the United States is determined by global political and economic environments that, frankly, the education community has no real influence as to what transpires in those environments. There is a significant change taking place in our economic structure, and it has been really taking place since the beginning of the 21st century. The real growth in occupations is in retail, personal services, tourism, and agriculture. There has actually been, as a percentage of total jobs, a decline in the number of occupations that require for eligibility to be considered for those jobs, there's been a decline in the number of such positions that require the baccalaureate and graduate degrees. There is now, because of the nature of the change in the growth of retail, personal services, tourism, and so forth, there's an increased emphasis on entrepreneurship, as well as the acquisition of technical skills and knowledge. And what is taking place is substantial growth in owner-operated small businesses. 2/3 of all small businesses are owned and operated by a single person. And that then, of course, affects the nature of the labor force and how that labor force is used as we move into the next decade. The aging of the workforce and the technological change that is coming will change the demand for the program mix offered by post-secondary education. It's especially going to change the demand for technical and certificate education. Entrepreneurship, skills to run a small business in services, is going to increase as the demand for traditional baccalaureate degrees declines. There's no need to go to a baccalaureate degree program if your goal is to open a print shop that's going to print t-shirts and so forth in a given community. There will be an increased demand for STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics certifications. And again, this is not degree oriented, it's skills and knowledge oriented. It is training people, for example, to be welders, to be technicians to repair HVAC systems, and so forth. As technology removes the old idea of working as a part of a team to construct something diminishes, you're going to see the demand for people to maintain and develop that equipment rise. And there's one other very important change here. As technology evolves, what you're going to see happen is people who enter a career, say in 2022, with the idea that they will stay in that career for 30 to 35, perhaps 40 years. That is not an assumption that the majority of the population is going to be able to make, because technological changes are going to alter what are traditional career paths. They're going to shorten the work life that can exist in certain occupations because those occupations are simply going to disappear. So the individual then will have to assume that he or she, especially if they're associated with retail or consumer-oriented industries, are going to have to assume at some point that their occupation is going to change to the point that they're going to have to seek retraining or an occupation in another industry. I'd like to then move to the effects of the pandemic on small business using, I want to use the small business sector to illustrate the economic effects of the pandemic. On January 1, 2020, small business being defined as anything that employs less than 500 people. At the beginning of 2020, in Illinois, there were about 1.2 million small businesses. They employed 2.5 million people. That's approximately 45% of total employment. For the United States, the number of small businesses was estimated to be 30.7 million, 12.3 million of which are owned by women and operated by women. They employed about 60 million people, which is again 40 to 45% of the workforce. 67% of those businesses are what we consider to be person-to-person businesses. That is, an individual supplying some service to another individual or small group of individuals. On March 21st, the state of Illinois was locked down. You were supposed to stay home, go out only as necessary. As a result of that lockdown, basically in an attempt to control the spread of the novel coronavirus, 40 to 50% of the small businesses in the state closed, at least temporarily. If the state remains in stage 4, and some areas have been downgraded back to kind of 3+, but if the state remains in stage 4 through the rest of the year, it is estimated that half of those small businesses that closed prior to, say, June of this year will never reopen. If stage 3 remains in effect through December 31st of 2021, no more than 20% of those small businesses that existed, 1.2 million businesses in the beginning of 2020, will survive. Now, why is this important? First of all, current estimates is it's going to take 5 to 10 years for the national economy to return to pre-pandemic levels of operation and conditions of employment. But this is based on 2 assumptions. The first of which is that there are no further long-term lockdowns or reimposing of regulations that limit the ability to conduct business. That is, if you're now allowed to open to serve customers inside, you will continue to be allowed to do that. That won't be taken away. If it is taken away, then the number of businesses that close permanently will rise. The other assumption here is very important, and that is that there is a development and distribution of an effective vaccine sometime in 2021. Okay, that is, people will have the ability to be vaccinated against the coronavirus by the end of 2021. Okay. Next slide. Oh, sorry. The effects on the community colleges and post-secondary education institute are numerous, but I want to concentrate on 2. The first of which is one that is not widely discussed, and that is that as a result of the loss of economic activity in the state, the community college districts, higher education is going to suffer a reduction in the amount of revenue it receives from state and local distributions of sales and income taxes. Businesses are closing, employment is lost. It is going to take some time before that loss in tax revenue can be made up. And the one thing I wish to stress here is it doesn't matter what you do with tax rates. If there's no business and no employment, the tax revenue is irrelevant to the amount of revenue that is distributed to the community colleges and other institutions. There is going to be a significant demand for retraining, for reemployment as a result of these business closures. In 2021, there will be an estimate of 1 million additional persons looking for a new job. Some will drop out of the labor force. Some will go back to being stay-at-home parents. But a significant percentage of that 1 million are going to want to go and need to go back to work. But the problem is that take the typical waitress or waitstaff who's been working at an Applebee's. The job is gone. Normally, in other times, that person would simply go to another restaurant, another part of the hospitality industry, and apply for a job and have a good chance of getting it. The problem now is that we have lost that employment or reemployment opportunity as these businesses have closed and are not likely to reopen. This will lead then to a demand for entrepreneurship training and technical training in order to fill the kinds of jobs that are going to be created as we move along in the 21st century. The other thing that I would like to mention here is that the small business sector is likely to lag larger firms in the recovery cycle. And that's simply because the demand for the services of small businesses, these person-to-person services, will depend on how quickly household incomes return to pre-pandemic levels and we return to pre-pandemic normalcy. That is, we decide how we're going to eat. How many times are we going to go out to eat? How many trips do you make to a nail salon? How do you have the confidence to go to a hair salon to get your hair cut, or a barber shop to get your hair cut? It comes down to who cuts your grass. The household incomes in the major industries have to recover before small businesses are going to be able to again open their doors and serve the persons who want their services on that personal level. The other problem here is capital, the money required to run a business. Capital lines of credit and the reserves have been exhausted by efforts to control the spread of the virus. That is, when you shut down a business, even if they get some money from the federal government to keep employees on payroll time, they're using money in their reserves to keep the place open. The average small business needs at least 6 months of capital to cover either the costs of opening the business or the costs of reopening the business. And those reserves are being exhausted. The only way that they can be replenished is to go to a bank or other financial institution to seek a loan. But the bank, at this point, is not likely to do very much because they're going to look at the sector in which you have your business and the number of closures and so forth before they would consider a loan. And they're basically going to ask most businesses one question: when are you going to repay the loan we made to you 6 months ago? So, as far as summary and conclusions of my presentation, I'd like to stress the following. Over the last decade, you can't deny the fact that Illinois has become a less desirable place to live and work, especially for those in the 25 to 44 age cohort who have taken their children, the future 18 to 24-year-olds, and moved somewhere in search of employment, and it's almost always been in search of an occupation that will allow them to have a stable career for at least the period during which they are raising their children. The economy of the state is actually becoming more like Florida. Our agricultural sector is growing. Tourism is becoming a more and more important part of the economy of the state. Our only problem is, unlike Florida, we don't have the beaches and climate, and we will have to figure out some way to address the issue of the structure of the state's economy. Population is aging as natural increase, births minus deaths decline, and the number of people that enter the state and stay here from other countries declines as well. The economy of this state has been badly damaged by the effects to control the novel coronavirus. The problem with that is that these effects are not going to disappear very quickly. It's going to lead to a slower recovery. And because of the issues surrounding the economic structure of Illinois at this point, Illinois, as it has since 2008, is going to recover more slowly than the rest of the nation, because we will depend more and more on this small business entrepreneurship sector of the economy to generate employment. From 2017, the labor force has actually declined by 200,000 over the decade. The Northeast quadrant population is stable. The population in the state south of Mount Vernon and west and south of Rock Island Moline, those populations have declined substantially, that is more than 5%. And there is little evidence that people will move into those areas or move back into those areas. So what we are going to see as a result of the demographic changes and the pandemic, the attempt to control the virus spread of the current pandemic, you're going to see adults who will need additional education. They will need to be retrained to find occupations and industries other than that which has released them, because those industries, especially the small businesses, are simply not going to exist. And we will always need literacy programs, because we've got to get people who are able to function effectively in the industries, especially the technical industries that are emerging in the next decade. Thank you for your attention, and we will take questions.